In today's staffing industry, social media is playing a larger role in the recruiting process. Social recruiting refers to the process of recruiting candidates through social media platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, and other websites including online forums, job boards, and blogs. I'm Joe McIntyre, host of Back to Work, and on this episode, we'll explore the impact of social recruiting in the staffing industry and share best practices for organizations wishing to formulate a social recruiting strategy. And joining me for this episode will be Michelle Sohl, Senior Business Development Manager at Yo. Michelle is a returning guest for this podcast. She appeared on the third episode of our Women at Work series. Be sure to listen to that episode where the conversation discusses the challenges women face in the technology industry and the initiatives being taken at Yo to support and promote women in tech. That episode and the entire series is available on all platforms and on our website. On today's episode, we will discuss the evolution of recruiting and how organizations can optimize their use of social media throughout the talent acquisition process. Michelle, welcome back.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me back. Happy to be here.
Great to have you. So let's kind of get started with a bit of an overview here. Can you tell us how social recruiting has evolved over the past few years and what role social media continues to play in that evolution?
Well, I think recruiting has gone past the job boards. It's past just placing a job ad, a post on Craigslist. We're beyond that now. It's now about actively engaging with your potential talent pool. And while doing that, at the same time, building your company brand. And this is something that social media has brought about for sure.
Has social media changed? Well, I know it has changed rather, but maybe has social media made the job of a recruiter easier or more difficult? I think you could probably go both ways, but what do you think?
I agree. I think both ways. I
Mhm.
think, the opportunity to reach a large audience is there because of social media and different platforms. But with that, there's so many different obstacles, your post can fall flat and maybe what you thought was going to reach a large audience does not. There's so much that goes into this new role in recruiting social media that really you got to have a solid strategy in place.
Yeah. Now, when a company is starting a social recruiting strategy or even a recruiter who's kind of just jumping in, what are some of the top must-haves for any social recruiting strategy?
Well, I mean, first, I think that companies need to have dedicated accounts on all of the platforms: LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Um, this is where they can share company information, events. This is where your audience is. Maybe on all of them, but maybe not on all of them, but definitely at least on one or two. And then with that, whoever is executing this, they have to have a strategy, what this approach is going to be, and how your company is going to be represented, because all of that is really important.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier some of those positives and drawbacks for recruiters when it comes to social, but just generally, what are some of the pros of social recruiting for candidates and for companies? And are there any pitfalls? I'm sure anyone who's been on LinkedIn has gotten an inquiry about a job potentially, and could go
Mhm.
either way with that. So, what are some of the pros and cons of it?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, first, it can be cost effective. It can be. I mean, you can pay if you want to, but you don't have to. So you can post a job. You can post anything about your company on LinkedIn or Twitter and have it go viral if the message is right. Um, so you can reach a nice group of people that are your target audience if you're doing it right, using the right hashtags, and maybe your employees are sharing. So this can get your post in front of the right people. Now, pitfalls, I mean, I guess you have to be careful too that you're not posting something that maybe doesn't reflect best on the brand. Maybe it hits a sour note. You definitely want to make sure you're posting valuable content, inclusive content. Um, and then on the flip side of that, for candidates, sometimes, I'm sure candidates have seen job postings where the numbers are through the roof. So it can be a little maybe discouraging, because especially in a really, crazy job market. Um, so you can get great candidates, you can get great resumes, but also a large influx at the same time. So it can be a little bit time consuming in that aspect.
Yeah, let's get into that a little bit. I mean, if you post a job and get hundreds or up, thousands of applicants, there's certainly time that it will take to comb through all those and find those that are actually qualified and those that aren't. But I
Mm-hmm.
didn't even think about we just mentioned there about someone seeing a job posting that they may be super qualified for, but they see
Yep.
there were 500 applicants. That can be discouraging. So is there any fix there? That's kind of just the way of the game.
Uh, you know, I wish I could say this is what you do here, but what I will say is don't count yourself out, especially if you feel like I can do this job. Uh, Apply. The other thing is, yes, you're going to go through the ATS, and yes, you might get rejected for whatever weird reason. There are things in place, that sometimes work and sometimes don't, but reaching out to people that work there and kind of starting relationships, starting conversations. If there's a company you really, really are interested in, the best thing to do is follow them and just try to get in touch with as many people as you can there. And, a lot of times that's how people break in. It's through a referral, through a relationship. You know, you find the right person the right day, and magic happens.
Now, certainly some jobs may be better suited for some apps than others. So,
Yeah.
how can organizations determine which platforms are the best channels to reach their target audience of candidates, whether it's engineering folks or healthcare folks, or maybe it's just some kind of general employees? How do you determine kind of which platforms are best?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is where, the person that is going to be doing this for this company, they need to know where their audience plays. So people in tech, people in science and engineering fields, they'll most likely be on LinkedIn, but they could also be on Twitter, right? More creative candidates, they will definitely be on Instagram and TikTok. You may find, you know, a scientist on TikTok, but it's probably not as likely as, a graphic designer or somebody that's doing, social media content, more fashion and beauty. This is where, that crowd is. So knowing where to find these people is really, that's most important. And then, you know, Facebook is a kind of like you can find all kinds of people there. So I think it's just knowing where your company sits, what kind of people you're looking for, and the kind of messaging that you want to put out.
Now, when you're creating these job postings to try to avoid as best you can getting people who are unqualified or even overqualified, is there any tip or strategy to target the posts that you're creating to ensure that the audience you're getting fits those roles better? Or is it just kind of, the rules of these apps, especially LinkedIn, allow for people from all backgrounds and all qualification levels to apply?
Yeah, I think that I think that's going to be tough, to be quite
Mhm,
honest. I mean, you
mhm.
can absolutely say what your preferred qualifications are, and the star candidate, the star applicant will have this, you know. But at the same time, I think it's refreshing to see companies that say at the bottom of their job posting, listen, this may or may not be you, but we encourage people that want to work for us, with us, to apply. And maybe we have something else that's better suited for you. So here's our career page. I think it's kind of a nicer way to redirect people that maybe are like, I want to work for this company. maybe this isn't the job for me, but I'm going to apply anyway, or they absolutely know they aren't qualified, but they're going to apply anyway. And look, I'm all for applying for something. We've talked about this before with the imposter syndrome. I'm all about that. But if you kind of know deep down, you really don't know this job, you're not going to really be great at it, then I think just going to the careers page and applying that way is the best bet. So when companies kind of encourage that, I think that's a nice way of trying to weed them out.
I think some of the research backs this up also, but some people find, especially candidates, that social recruiting can be a little bit impersonal when you're applying for jobs and you don't hear back for days, weeks, or even months.
Hmm.
Certainly, Yo is a recruiting firm doing some of the best work in this area. But is there a way to make sure that people are kind of being alerted and updated throughout this process? Is there a best practices there?
Yeah, so I mean, what's nice about, and I'm thinking that most recruitment firms and I'm sure many companies have this in place, but when we post a job online, um, we get notified through LinkedIn, but also it is connected to our CRM. So we will see candidates from that job posting, and our recruiting team is quite good at following up with these candidates, making sure that whether they're a fit or not, that they've been reached out to. I think that's the human way to be, the kindest way. I know it happens. People apply and they don't hear anything. I don't. That's never gonna not happen, right? I think but the more we kind of put it out there, like, this is the way that recruitment should be, this is the way that applicants should be treated, the more we give them a voice too, because we see the frustration. I see posts like that all the time. I got ghosted. I never hear from anybody. Ghosting is like the ugliest word of 2023. So, you don't want to be known for that. So I think just having that kind approach, that human approach is definitely important.
Right. It goes back to your employment and your recruitment brand. If people are applying for jobs and it's through Yo or it's through, a company or someone who's listening to this podcast and
Hmm.
they have a terrible experience, that's going to be pretty terrible for your recruitment brand and for your employment brand in general. So it kind
Yep.
of all goes back to, if you're going to be a good employer or a good recruitment firm, these are kind of the basics, right?
Yeah, all of
Yeah.
that matters, all
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah. Now, is there value in organizations putting money behind certain postings? So think LinkedIn ads for specific jobs to amplify their reach, or should organizations stick mostly to organic posts?
I mean, organic reach is lovely. It doesn't always work out, but I think if there's a post that you're seeing is getting engagement and you want to give it a boost, um, I think it's okay. I think put the money behind it, because you may get even more out of it. If it's a high level role that you want passive candidates to see, maybe put money behind that as well. I mean, organic reach is probably the best way, having employees share it, um, through different social channels. It's necessary, but it doesn't, I should say it's not necessary, but it's a nice to have. Because if you feel like you have something important you need to get out there, then throw money behind it. I wouldn't do it on, just any old post though.
Got it. Now, certainly when someone goes to LinkedIn to look for a job or just to browse, they're going to see not just job postings, but other posts as well that the company is sharing. So when reviewing an organization's social media presence, what other posts, those not specifically referencing open jobs, are candidates looking for? Is it uh, just general company info? Is it benefits? Is
Mm,
it company culture? What sorts of topics or themes should
yeah.
organizations also be posting about?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, all of that. They want to peek into company culture. They want to see, if companies are in office, when they are in office, what's happening behind the doors there. Any kind of events, any kind of, awards, or especially if they're really passionate about certain things, embracing D&I and happy employees. Happy employees are your best kind of, that's the best way to promote your company, is when people are happy, and then of course any news that is in your industry, you want to make sure that your audience knows that what's going on in your industry. So good and bad, you gotta put it out there that you have a finger on it, and what your thoughts are and how you feel about it. I mean, this is, company people want to know what companies are thinking and what they're behind.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about pay transparency. Yo actually just did a survey that found a majority of Americans want greater pay transparency, whether that's through open positions or even current roles of
Hmm.
employees currently employed. I guess, what has pay transparency done, or rather, what has social media done to pay transparency? I'm assuming it's kind of increased that demand for it. When you see a job posting on LinkedIn and you scroll
Hmm.
down, you don't see any salary range even shared. That could turn some people off. So is there kind of a, must have for pay transparency now?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are not applying if they don't see a salary range. Put a range, even if you don't want, I think it's great too. Some companies are saying, listen, this is kind of what we have this budgeted for, almost, put that out there. But depending on experience, it could be from this number to this number. I mean, candidates know if you're really a solid, candidate, you can perform well. That number is not always solid, be all end all, right? There's some negotiation there, but I think it's because they want to make sure that everybody knows where they stand. If it's $125,000 range, 120 to 130, you're not going to get 200 grand.
Right.
It's not right. Like, it's just about knowing, like setting expectations, really. But yeah, it might be 120, but then you might get 130 or 135 with bonus. And there's a lot that goes into it. But I think it's just now, you have to put it on there because people are expecting it.
Right. And that goes back to what we talked about before about weeding out some of the qualified versus unqualified candidates. Pay transparency
Hmm.
has a role in that.
It sure does, because somebody was thinking, I can do this. And then you look at it and it's, a $250,000 base, and they were not anywhere close to that. And they're thinking, oh, okay, this may not be what I was thinking. This is a little over my head, baby.
Right. And then I guess same thing conversely, if someone is currently making 250,000 and they see the job range is again 120 to 130, they say,
Yeah,
okay, that's probably not for me.
that's right.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yep. Now, obviously, as you're going through social recruiting, you're going to want to see how the campaign's going. Certainly, being able to hire someone for the role is a sign that it probably did work if it worked through social. But what other kinds of metrics should organizations be collecting or looking at when evaluating how effective a social campaign is?
You have to be able to see those numbers. So again, going back to whoever is kind of driving this and in charge of this, they need to look at those, analytics, and be able to see, okay, this post is doing okay. It's maybe not gone viral, but what worked? What made this get this kind of attention? And this one fell flat. Okay, why? Who did this reach? What industries, what audience, and what industry did this kind of strike a chord with? All of these things have to be considered, because now that prepares you for your next post. It's all about feedback, knowing what works, what doesn't work, so that when you put out your next post and the post after that, they're not just, falling flat and nobody's seeing it. I mean, the whole purpose is to get as many eyes on it as possible.
Now, Michelle, in your opinion, what does maybe the future of social recruiting look like? Are there any trends that are kind of reshaping how it's going to look? Kind of how does this all shake out in the next 5 or so years, 5 to 10 years?
Right now, I don't even want to say that this is a trend. This is recruiting now. And so now companies need to kind of follow whatever these platforms are putting out, whatever features they're putting out within reason, to be able to get the most eyes on their posts, whether it's videos, stories, carousels, LinkedIn Lives, Instagram Live. I mean, all of these features help you stand out. It keeps your audience engaged. It also, you get rewarded for also utilizing these tools. So, as maybe scary or uncomfortable as it can be, doing a LinkedIn Live or an Instagram Live is definitely going to boost your other posts, because that's the whole purpose of these platforms. They want all of these features used. So, companies are going to have to get past just the, picture post and the word post. They've got to start getting more active and engaged with their audience. And this, I'm sure this is just scratching the surface. I'm not even sure what else they can come up with, but I know that they will come up with some new things on these platforms. And we're going to have to jump on board. This is how it is.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast and detailing just some of the ways that hiring managers and recruiters can use social media as a source to attract top talent. If our listeners want to get in touch with you about Yo, learn more about your background, how should they go about doing that?
They can certainly find me on LinkedIn, Michelle Sohl, Sohl. And also they can send me an email, michelle.sohl@yo.com.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, also thank you to our listeners as well for tuning into Yo's Back to Work podcast. To hear future episodes, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen in. For Yo's Back to Work, I'm Joe McIntyre. Thanks for listening.